Hello, my name is Father Tighe, and this is our 60th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross, and this ends chapter 10. We go to our screen and we see the theme for this final segment. Jerusalem submits to the madness of zealots, Sadducees, and Pharisees. They tried to force God to be what they imaged him to be, but it just brought about the destruction of Jerusalem. They felt forsaken, that is abandoned, in shame and rejection, so they bring about original sin. Okay, now we go to our first screen and say, how did the rebellion of Jerusalem begin? The completion of the temple in 65 put thousands out of work. It caused an economic depression, and this underlies everything else. Number two, Agrippa, the great-grandson of Herod the Great, kept replacing the high priest, and they each came from a different Sadducean family. So this caused Sadducean family feuds. They were hatred of each other. The Caesarean Gentiles. Now Caesarea is the Jewish place for the governor, and that's on the coast on the Mediterranean Sea, and that's where Paul was put on trial, remember? The Gentiles there humiliated the Sadduceans in street theater, mocking their performance in sacrifices of birds. So it's very important when a religious leader is reduced to a performer, not somebody who brings God's presence, he is in trouble. Performance over essence, okay? We go on to our next screen. In 66, Governor Florus, claimed the Sadduceans had shortchanged him. So he brazenly went right into the temple, which nobody was supposed to do, much less the high priest only once a year. And he took 17 gold talents. He thought he could just do it. The Jews rioted at the sacrilege of Florus, okay? Florus, he gets back and he says, oh, you're going to riot? So he takes many Jewish leaders and he crucifies them, okay? Eleazar, the captain of the temple, he goes to the temporary high priest and he says to him, I know what we'll do is stop the daily sacrifice to Nero. This is crossing the river. You know, they're really going to cause the rebellion right now. Now we go and we see in our next screen how the zealots contributed to all this. In 66 AD, the zealots killed a whole Palestinian town. They massacred the town for killing one Jewish pilgrim. They said the only way to deal with these Gentiles is tough, and if they kill one Jewish pilgrim, we'll kill the whole town, and they did, okay? Then, later on that year, when the sacrifice to Nero was canceled, these same zealots says, now we can force the war. They seized the Antonia fortress, which overlooked the temple and was populated by Roman soldiers, and they killed all the Roman soldiers. Now there was no turning back. The Essenes, who were down south of Jerusalem in the Dead Sea Valley down there, they said, we got to get into this. So they march up to Jerusalem and they cause a power struggle. So the rebels start fighting with each other. The Nazarenes, these are the Christians. They're not called Christians in the Hebrew language. They're the followers of Jesus the Nazareth. The Nazarenes flee east to Jordan. We told you that about Pella. And then west to Ephesus in Turkey, and Alexandria in Egypt. Okay, now, we go on to our next screen. All right, we see that General Vespasian was sent by Emperor Nero to put down the Jewish rebellion. He surrounded the city in 67. During a lull, there were many lulls in the battle, a Pharisee, a prominent Pharisee, was carried out of the city by his aides, and his name was Joannes ben Zakkai. He was carried out in a casket out of the city. The Roman soldiers stopped him and they said, this is a phony. He was stopped and brought to Vespasian. Johannes, in God's name, prophesied that Vespasian would become the emperor. Vespasian liked to hear this, but he also needed Jewish leaders for the peace. The Romans were very political. They said, this is a rebellion, that's what we're putting down. We're not prejudiced against your religion. So Joannes ben Zakkai won his favor. Now we go to our next screen, and we see that Vespasian approved that Joannes going out to Jamnia near the Mediterranean Sea. So it was a little town, and he could do his writing there and direct the future and prepare for the future after the destruction of Jerusalem. He put him in charge of Jewish internal affairs. Joannes proclaimed Nazarenes the ultimate enemies of Israel for preaching assimilation. Not the Zealots, not the Sadducees, not the Pharisees, but the Christians, the followers of Jesus, the Nazarene. He saved modern Judaism by codifying oral tradition. This took him about 15 years, called the Mishnah, so Jews could survive without a temple. All right, now we go to our next screen. Joannes' prophecy came true miraculously. Nero died suddenly in 68 AD from foolishness. He got sick and he died. Vespasian became emperor as Joannes had prophesied, and he sent his own son Titus to complete the destruction of Jerusalem, which he did in 70. It was horrible, and many Jews sold into slavery, but the population of Jerusalem was only 26,000, where there were 400,000 Jews in Alexandria and almost a million in Rome. Titus took gold and silver from the temple to build the Colosseum in Rome. We go on to our next screen. The diaspora Jews who lived throughout the empire, they saw the contempt and rage of these leaders as madness. So they offered no help. So Jerusalem got no help from the diaspora Jews. Diaspora Jews mean those who live outside Jerusalem. They considered the destruction as God's judgment on their foolishness. So they were condemned by their own people. Now, the teaching point I want to make, fear of assimilation with lowlife. So instead of looking at Gentiles as children of darkness and confusion, you have contempt for them as lowlife, can lead people into contempt, madness, and self-destruction. Some diaspora Jews felt free to choose to be baptized, and this brought further acrimony down on the poor Nazarenes. All right, we go to our next screen. Now we're back to the theme. Jerusalem submits to madness of zealots, Sadducees, and Pharisees. They tried to force God to be what they imaged him to be, but it just brought about the destruction of Jerusalem. They felt forsaken, abandoned, in shame and rejection. Okay, now we go on to our next screen, and we say, why is this so important to our teaching on Scripture? The Christians had a lot to think and pray about in the light of the cross. The hymn we have been singing in the background captures these prayers. In essence, this hymn, they saw the destruction and the crucifixion as one eternal image. That's why I keep playing it. It's a strange thing. They come together. These prayerful reflections enable church to produce the four Gospels of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. So now I want to stop and show you the chart so you can see why this is so important. I want to remind you with this chart that the Jerusalem was destroyed in 70, and only after that were the Gospels published. So we see Mark in 75, Luke and Matthew in 85, and John in 95. There was something about the destruction of Jerusalem that focused them and put everything together in an eternal image that enabled them to complete what they had been writing. So they were writing these Gospels before 70, but they couldn't put them together until the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, before I go back to the next hymn we're going to end with, I want to thank Jason Brown and Martha Velez for the great work they've done that brought us to this 60th segment, the end of our 10th chapter. Okay? And we'll begin later on with our next 60 when we get to the Gospels. Especially, I want to move along to John's Gospel. So thank you for joining us. And now we're going to sing the hymn. Jerusalem, hark how the angels sing. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna to your King. And now as we sing the verse, we want to think, why does the crucifixion bring the destruction of Solomon's temple and the temple of Herod the Great together in the crucifixion to make sense and to write the Gospels? With the glad hosannas, but the little children sang.